So you asked for it, let me share. In the 70s and early 80s, I was a private practicing attorney. Don't hold that against me. There actually are 5 of us on the continent that are honest. And in a segue, I would say, Shakespeare used to say, first we must kill all of the lawyers. And to that I have said, hey, let's do it. And I'll even be one of the front ones to go, provided you make sure we get us all. I mean, I will sacrifice myself if we can get us all. I'm not looking for Bastille Day to cover and include me, but so this little video is about 2 things. Number 1, I want to tell you the stories, and number 2, I want to talk in a playful, hypothetical way of how we do away with the treason. All right. So, number 1, in the 70s and early 80s, I was a private practicing attorney, as I started to say, and we did not have a public defender, so they appointed us without asking us to represent people. And it was a violation of our constitutional rights to take our time and energy and then to pay us at half price and then to have us spend extra time and then to dock our hours and then to insist that we do a good job but make sure that we didn't spend enough time at it to actually cost the county any money. So if you think that the indigent get a fair shake in public defense or an appointed counsel, the first thing I would tell you is that for at least 50 years that has been a lie. All right? And it is an awful lie. And I watch these public defenders show up at the courthouse and their clients show up at the courthouse, or they're dragged over from the sheriff's office and they spend 4 minutes with them, and then when they're called upon they come up before the judge and all they've told the person is, well, this is just an arraignment, you're going to plead not guilty, blah blah blah. That's it. And I would not call that representation, and as a matter of fact I find it abhorrent, but that's what's going on, and I see it all over. It's in the big counties and the little counties, it's everywhere. It's full of graft, and in the worst of cases, the public defender shakes people down. And I saw that happen in 1974, where the lead public defender, the guy for whom I worked, we had a big drug bust of 60 or 70 people. This guy came up, he was on bond, and my boss said, well, I think I can get you off, but it's going to cost you. And, well, I'm public defended, right? Yeah, but if you want to get off, it's going to cost you. And it was going to be, I don't know, $750, which at the time was like $5,000 now. And then a few hours later, I watched him shaking down the deputy county attorney that why this guy ought to get off, and he argued vociferously, and sure enough, with 70 drug busts facing him, the deputy county attorney caved. This guy was one of the lesser of the people, and sure enough, my guy made money. Not my guy, but the guy for whom I worked made money, and the client walked free, which was a total travesty on top of everything else. Not so much in him walking, but in the way it was done. And I was also, after I graduated, I was appointed to represent people, and I represented indigent criminal defendants, both felony and misdemeanor. And on occasion I represented somebody that was alleged to be incompetent, insane, incapable of making decisions for themselves. And the rules had changed in the early 70s because we were trying to take people out of the institutions, and so they came up with a new standard that basically said they have to be an immediate danger to themselves or to somebody else, or we can't do anything for them. So part of the reason why we have several 100,000 people living under bridges and all over the place is as long as they don't bother anybody else and they're not an immediate danger to themselves, the standard that went up in the 70s was, well, we can't mess with these folks because they have a right to make their own decisions. The fact that they might be insane, incompetent, incapable, have special needs, have special education requirements, have learning disabilities. None of that matters as long as they're making their own decision and they're not threatening, standing on a pillar somewhere threatening to commit suicide or to take down 5 people at the shopping mall or at the post office. So as long as they don't do that, we as a society are happy that they are living under the bridge and not causing any problems. So I was represented. Let me give you the first one first, or the second one first. There was a guy that was teaching, a young teacher, seemed like a really nice guy, and one day I got called to the sheriff's office to represent this guy, and it turns out that he had had some kind of mental instability and was running up and down the street with a hatchet begging people to cut off his arm because there was a demon in it. And it wasn't funny at the time because he had a hatchet and at some point he might well have tried to chop it off himself, but he was seeking somebody else to do it. And I represented him, and he objected, of course, and we had a little mini trial. And first of all, he could only be held 72 hours. All right, let me get through the procedure. He had a right to have a hearing within the 72 hours, and that, of course, means immediate action on everybody's part. I did my best to defend him, recognizing that sometimes the best thing for a client is that, in fact, the process works for itself, but it is not my choice. It's the judge's choice. So I did what I could to show that he was competent, and of course had to admit and acknowledge that he had problems. And so he was sent to the state mental institution for months, and that, by the way, after the mid-70s, and as part of the whole review of our mental illness problems and detaining people, was subject to review, I think, in 90 days, and then every 90 days, so he could be brought back for it. Well, several months later, he showed up at my office, and as it turns out, he had a girlfriend with him. And I was delighted to see him because he was obviously in good straits, and he was fit and playful and engaged. And so I took him into my office and we had this lovely conversation, and he proceeded to tell me that I think he had torn up a pillow at the institution and some other stuff. And so the therapy they were giving him was to tie him to a chair, cover him with water, pour the pillows all over him, and have feathers stuck to him everywhere, and that was supposed to be therapeutic. And finally, as he described it to me, he decided that the only way he was ever going to get out of there is if he showed more sanity than the people who were running the insane asylum. And so that he knew he needed to get control of himself. And as he did so, they had to figure out he was okay and release him. So it was a matter of internal self-revelation on his part. So the other part that he wanted to tell me was that the chief psychiatrist at the hospital was part of the problem of giving him a very, very hard time. And then he introduced a little bit more about his girlfriend to tell me that it was the psychiatrist's daughter and that he had stolen her away from the psychiatrist and wooed her to be with him, and she thought it was as funny as he did, and off they went. So that's the first story. The second story is that I was called one day to represent a woman. God, you know, she doesn't have any kids. She's been dead for many years. It's part of a public hearing. I guess I can say who she was because the name is perfect for her. And her name was Hazel. And she was my dad's age. She was probably 25 years older than I was. She was, I think, in his class in high school. She would have been 60 years old, I suppose, or close to it, 55 or 60 at the time. And the sheriff's department had been called to come to her house because she had allegedly been chasing kids down the alley with the broom, which fits, right? Witch Hazel, the broom, the whole works. This is Halloween. And so they had decided that they better pick her up and at least bring her in for the 72-hour detention. And the first time they went there, they knocked and then they stayed back in the shadows because they were a little concerned about her. She came out with a big puffy vest on and reached into the vest and asked them what they wanted, and they decided that was not a good time to arrest her or to pick her up because she might actually have a loaded pistol in her. So they didn't do that. The second time they came, they peeped in on her, and she was engaged in personal stimulation. Let me leave it at that, and you can use your own you can use your own imaginations. And they decided that was probably not a good time. And the third time they actually found her in a neutral spot and picked her up and took her over to the hospital. So I want to flash you forward to the hearing that we had within the 72 hours. And so Hazel and I are sitting on one side and the county attorney is sitting on the other side, and they call the deputy sheriff in, and the deputy sheriff takes the stand and the judge is listening attentively. And this deputy sheriff is a big guy with a big deep voice. He's strong, he's wedge-shaped, he's about 6'3". He's got this powerful voice. He's a good deputy sheriff. And he turns out later to be the sheriff. Nice guy, really nice guy. And so the county attorney says, well, you took Hazel to the hospital, right? Yes. And you had her in the examination room? Yes. And what happened next, deputy sheriff? I'm not going to use his name because he's still around. He said, well, do I have to say it? Yeah, you need to tell what happened next. And he said, well, she grabbed me. Well, what do you mean, deputy? Well, she reached over and grabbed me by the balls. The judge roared and laughed. The county attorney roared and laughed. Hazel roared and laughed and told me that it had been really quite fun. And she rendered me helpless. Well, that didn't help Hazel, and Hazel ended up spending some time at the state sanitarium. But it was a fun process to get to there, and she likewise came back to see me later, and I had a lovely connection with her as well as a whole bunch of other folks that were outliers in the community that saw me as helping them out, and it was a great deal. All right, so the second issue, about which I alluded and which I would like to discuss, is we have, for high crimes and misdemeanors, we have treason, right? We have high treason, and high treason is a very serious offense. I'm not going to go to the trouble right now reading the federal statutes and the rest of that. I think all of you know what we're talking about, and we all know that this has been discussed many, many times in many, many venues about all of 100 people of high positions in our government over the last 20-odd years. It goes back to Bill Clinton. It certainly covers everybody in the little George Shrubby Bush deal. High treason, when you kill 3,000 people, when you know that 3,000 people are going to die, when you know that 4 plane loads of people are going to die, and that is part of your political agenda to move the Patriot Act forward to invade Iraq and Afghanistan, to protect the poppy fields from which you're making huge fortunes, and for closing in on the oil in Iraq. And you're doing this all for the CIA and the rest of these guys, for the banksters, for the traffickers. Then it is evil at its core, and every single one of those people should hang. Who am I talking about? A little Shrubby Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, Condoleezza Rice, the Pearl and Wolfowitz and Feith, and dozens of others, people that were knowingly off duty. And I'm going to add to you, in the New York area, we have 2 obvious ones. Larry Silverstein, who suffered high treason and allowed for an invasion of private individuals as part of a collective scheme. And Rudy Giuliani. You know, everybody wants to make a hero out of Rudy Giuliani because, you know, he's the former mayor and he's a former prosecutor and he is a outspoken speaker and the rest of that, and he's a good buddy of Trump and he's been taking bad rap. Well, he was right in the middle of it, and he was, if you look at him, he pulled his emergency preparedness team out of building number 7 hours ahead of time and knew full well it was going to fail. I can't prove, obviously, but Rudy Giuliani should be tried for high treason as an accomplice to the process, and all of those folks should go down. Now, Obama's administration is very, very similar. You've got Biden that is engaged in pay for play with Ukraine and elsewhere, and God knows where else, and certainly China. You know, $1.5 billion of loan to his kid as part of this, and why it gets absolutely zero traction on the mainstream media, even as debauched as they are, is crazy stuff. But it does. And then you've got Hillary Clinton, who is in a zone all of her own, and then all of the high folks in Congress. You've got Paul Ryan, who traded off, and I think can be proven to have been a player. You've got McConnell, who's married to, and it's not guilt by association, married to the family of the Chinese magnates, the shipping folks. Are there benefits that have been given to them? That is a serious crime if it's not high treason. You have most of Congress. You know, somebody asked me who I would save in Congress if we could do cleanup, right? I can't come up with 5 names. I cannot come up with 5 names because everyone is either full on into it, and the Dems, of course, Schumer, Pelosi, Feinstein, the rest of that Schiff, are right in the middle of it. Nadler and all the rest of those guys are right in the middle of it, and they're deep and dark, and many of them are 2-state players. That is, they have double passports. They are citizens in multiple states, and where they show deference to their other country, they are violating their fundamental oath to us. Is it high crime and misdemeanor? Maybe not to hang them if that's all they did wrong, but certainly to put them in prison and certainly to take them out of Congress. And nobody should be, there should be a requirement that you renounce any foreign citizenship or any foreign influence or any foreign values or any foreign benefits in order to be a public citizen for us. I mean, that should be a given. So now let's get to the fun part, right? I mean, I thought about doing this a long time ago, and I thought even about t-shirts. I thought about doing a raffle, which I thought would be really fun, which is that the person who won the raffle got to say, I get to be the executioner. And so we would do the raffle, and you'd get a t-shirt that says, when it happens, I get to execute Hillary. And then we would have a symbol that showed how we would do it. And some of you have been very creative here. I mean, there's, silver stakes, stake pockets drawn and quartered, spiking them like a porcupine, public hangings, of course, guillotines, hanging them upside down Mussolini style and stoning them to death. You know, the truth of the matter is that we have a constitutional statement that says that we will not engage in cruel and unusual punishment. And I think for most crimes, obviously for somebody selling marijuana, cruel and unusual punishment is to spend 5 years in jail. That's cruel and unusual punishment. But when you get to a place where you send military or send planes, fake planes or drones, where you have bombs set up, explosives set up in multi-story buildings, 100-story buildings, and you take them down as part of your devious political scheme, cruel and unusual punishment is to fit the crime. And in that kind of setting, is it cruel? I mean, now let me give you one of the scenarios. I think that Silverstein and Rumsfeld and some of the others directly involved in it should be taken to the 92nd floor of some building, and then with huge windows out front and the rest of that, free fall and the whole works, and then there would be torches and flames and smoke and heat that would begin to fill the room, and they would be given a choice between burning to death or jumping. The only problem with that is that I want that to happen 3,000 times, because I want them to properly pay for what they did. So the other one that I thought is to take them to the Washington Mall and have a lottery. So maybe there are 10,000 of them. By the time we get all of them rounded up for execution, the proper thing to do in a methodical, legally mandated way would be to specifically authorize public executions, and maybe even to have guillotines and crucifixion. Some of you are not going to like that, and hangings, and then we would choose which one would be proper for that individual. But we would bring all of them there every day, and then have a lottery, and maybe choose 10 or 20 of them, like the little balls and the rest of that. We'd open them up, and yes, it would be Dick Cheney's day, and he would actually hang for it. But they would go there for 100 days or 1,000 days for the term of one full 4-year office set, and they would never know what day they were going to hang or be executed. And that we would publicly publicize those every day. And why would I do that? Well, those things should be so deeply steeped into our consciousness that nobody would ever think about violating their fundamental obligation to this country and to 325 or 30 million people that rely on them to do the best they can for us. And when they fundamentally, intentionally violate it, they should be publicly displayed for the evil they've committed. So are there other ways, boiled in oil? I think maybe Hillary, the proper disposition of Hillary, which Hillary, not which Hillary, but which Hillary, would be to be burned at the stake. I mean, it's not since Joan of Arc would that have been done, and not since God knows when would anybody have the real right to be burned at the stake as Hillary. And so I take in your suggestions. My thought was to have t-shirts that allow us to say who we'd like to take down and how, and maybe even have a raffle that says, for $1 a piece, you guys can throw your name into a raffle. You can pick who it is that you want to execute and how it is that you'd want to execute them, and we'd make a t-shirt for you. I think it'd be so much fun. So do some thinking on it. We have to get to a place where we are not going to sit here idly and watch. And the little scene that's going on with this impeachment, I hate to say to you folks, is part of the distraction. It's just part of the distraction. Knowing that President Trump announced that Baghdadi had been killed, just as Obama did, in order to boost their own image at certain times, and certainly with this impeachment going on. Look, I'm in charge. We're getting rid of the bad guys. I'm your commander-in-chief. Look at the wonderful things I'm doing. I'm sorry, that's the tail wagging the dog. It's the 2 missiles that Bill Clinton shot when he was in the middle of impeachment, that he shot going after the terrorists in Africa, right? The Sudan or somewhere else in there. It is crazy stuff. And somehow we have to look beyond these. For those of you who say, well, the Republicans are doing this or the Democrats are doing that, please stop. Yes, the Democrats are probably crazier right now than the Republicans, but the Republicans, those neocons and Zionists and never Trumpers, the guys that are working in the background that are actually deceiving us and cooperating with and planning and plotting with the Democrats, at the same time they're claiming to be Republicans and expect you to support them, are no better than the other side. And in any case, there are so many of them that are corrupt and dark, and that are being managed and manipulated by the dark forces, that it really does not matter. What we have to do is push all that aside and say, yes, but what are you really doing? If Trump, you're going to take away all of our guns first and then allow us to have hearings, how does that not violate fundamental due process and the Second Amendment? And how is it that you get away with that and then tell us that if you vote for me, I'm going to protect the Second Amendment? You can't have it both ways. So it's all distraction, and nobody is a good guy, and there's nobody there to help us. And so what we need to do is to push them to actually respond to us, and that means that many of you that have awakened, when the 100th monkey hits, when 100 million or 10 million or 20 million of us say, no more, no mas, we won't do it, then we can make enough noise to turn them all back and away and take the worst ones out. Thanks so much for watching, and hey, how about the raffle? How about the t-shirts? How about the executions? Go for it. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed my little diatribe.